Hell yeah, everyone is excited about the Dallas Cowboys 2024 NFL draft class, but there is a handful of players that might not be that happy because here are 7 players that were put on blast by the Cowboys rookie class. Let's get to it. Here we go. What is up, everyone, and welcome into A to Z Sports Dallas Prime Time. We're streaming live every Sunday and Thursday night and catching up with each other in between, like today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the show. Cowboys draft class is the talk right now among Cowboys Nation, and it should be, right? It's still April, it's 30th right now, so we're obviously going to keep talking about these rookies. But today, I wanted to change it up a little bit, and I wanted to actually talk about the players most affected by the draft class and the rookie class. And I specify with the latter because on this list, we're going to open up with one player that is not exactly impacted by a draft pick, but actually by a UDFA. But before I begin with my picks for the players that were put on blast by this rookie class, let me know in the chat, who do you think was put on blast the most with this rookie class within the Cowboys roster? Let me know in the comments. What do you make of this? Looking forward to seeing all of your answers. But in the meantime, let's get to my answers very quickly. Number one, and not to say that he more than the others, by the way, not necessarily in that kind of order, but I've got Peyton Hendershot. Now, listen, I wanted to add Hendershot because last night we talked about Brevin Spanford, the UDFA who the Cowboys paid $245,000 to in guaranteed money. And I talked about how Hendershot will have to fight for his spot on the roster. Here's why. You've got a large list of tight ends at this moment, and you're likely going to carry 4 at the most into the 53-man roster. So that makes Jake Ferguson, Luke Schoonmaker, in my opinion, the top 2. And I don't know if Schoonmaker is exactly the second best tight end on the team, but I really don't believe the Cowboys will be cutting a second-round draft pick. I don't think that's how they do things, for better or worse. So I think Schoonmaker can be seen as a lock. That leaves, at the most, 2 spots for Hendershot, Princeton fan, who I don't think bearing any surprise, he shouldn't be one of the favorites to make the team. John Stephens Jr., who is on a different level because the Cowboys front office has straight up told us Stephens Jr. would have made the roster if he had not suffered a season-ending injury in 2023. And then you get Brevin Spanford and Alec Holler. I think it's pick 2 out of 3 when it comes to Hendershot, Stephens Jr., and Spanford. I think it's 2 out of 3 on that list. Peyton Hendershot put on blast, and he will have to show up for training camp, which, by the way, is a key aspect of this conversation. Not because I'm saying that, hey, these were put on blast. I don't think that necessarily means that they're going to be cut. They're going to lose their starting role, because we're going to get into some starters later on. I think it just means they got to bring their A game into the offseason. Now, moving on to number 2, and this is an obvious one, but how about Brock Hoffman? And I don't think this is one of the ones that should be considered like from a 53-man roster spot point of view, because Hoffman is making the team. I think he's one of the locks on the offensive line side of things. But Hoffman is no longer your projected starter. I mean, he might be, but he was a clear-cut favorite, and now we're all talking about Cooper Beebe, who, although was a guard at Kansas State, now could be looking at starting at center, learning how to snap the football, and learning how to play the position from a mental point of view, which Kansas State coaches seem to believe he can do. So that part is going to be very interesting. I think Brock Hoffman will have to surprise us in order to keep the starting center job over Cooper Beebe, who brings the upside. And obviously, he's a high floor player with not a whole lot of upside because he isn't like this athletic freak or anything like that. But Cooper Beebe, clearly liked by the Cowboys. And I always think there's a kind of like a big difference in the talent, just raw talent, when you're a 3rd-round draft pick versus when you were UDFA. Not that a UDFA cannot beat a third rounder. Not only can that happen, it has happened in the past because it's all about who are you right now. But it shows you how just from the get-go how much the Cowboys value Cooper Beebe, if that makes sense. Anyways, Brock Hoffman put on blast. We're going to stick on the offensive line, though, for a moment. And we're going to go with Chuma Edoga as another player put on blast in the offensive line. This is a little bit different, though. I think just the fact that they picked 3 offensive linemen kind of makes that roster bubble at the end of the position much more interesting. And even though he was one of the lone free agent signings, and in this case, it was more of a re-signing, obviously, I think Chuma Edoga could be cut in August before the season starts. Because the way that I would look at it is, if you wanted Chuma to be this guard, tackle, versatile player, that might be Nathan Thomas now, who you picked day 3 to develop, right? Not an NFL-ready product, but Nate Thomas is a mauler who, although he played tackle at Louisiana, might project best as a guard in the NFL just because he's so powerful. And it isn't like he has 35-inch arms or something like that. So Nate Thomas, I think, is one of those picks that sneakily might push Chuma Edoga off of the roster. And the thing is, it's not just Thomas that he needs to beat, right? Like, Matawaletsko might be above Chuma in the depth chart. I don't know if, like, Azim Richards should be above him in the depth chart as well. But here's where it gets even more interesting. What about Earl Bostic Jr., who the Cowboys also paid it back to in UDFA back in 2023? How does that look like in year 2? Chuma Edoga put on blast. You add 3 offensive linemen to the team through the draft, and obviously those guys on the roster bubble start sweating a little bit. So Chuma Edoga, I left him out of my 53-man roster projection, at least personally. So that's going to get very, very interesting moving forward. Next on the list, edge rusher, Willam Foko. Listen, I have a hard time believing that he will be cut from the Cowboys. 4th-round draft pick last year. The Cowboys wanted to bet on some traits, right? They wanted to bet on those violent, useful hands that he has. But Willam Foko with the Marshawn Neiland pick is now looking at edge rusher 5 at best, right? So, at this point, Fehoko is looking at potentially being a healthy scratch again during the season, or maybe even fighting a Tyrus Wet, Darrell Johnson for that final spot on the edge room. Willam Fehoko was absolutely put on blast by the Willam Fehoko pick, 100%. And I think that is going to be an underrated story going into training camp. Just how big of a jump does he make in year 2? That's going to be very interesting to watch. Willam Fehoko, specifically when he was picked as a prospect, wasn't necessarily seen as somebody with elite athletic traits that was a developmental project. I think he was more of a high floor pick where the Cowboys were hoping to maybe get some production out of him immediately, thanks to the fact that he was very efficient with his hands already when he was playing in college. So what do things look like for Williami in year 2? Is he going to make the roster or not? I had him in as my final edge rusher. I carried 5 edges on my 53-man roster projection, which you can check out at adzsports.com/Dallas, by the way. But Fehoko, not a roster lock at all. Now, let's stay on defense for a little bit here, and let's go to the defensive backfield now, though. Let's go to Cowboys cornerback room, and let me tell you, this is a 2-for-1, right? Because number 1, I'm going to put CJ Goodwin on this list with an asterisk, right? I think we do this every year. Every year we sit here and we're like, how the heck does CJ Goodwin fit into the Cowboys 53-man roster when he only brings value on special teams? And when he, in this case, now just dealt with a season-ending injury early on in 2023, is a year older, and you get into this space where you start doubting if CJ is going to make it, but every single year he does make it. So I included him on my 53. I'm going to start acting like CJ Goodwin is a roster lock until proven otherwise. That being said, though, he'll have to fight for it, all right? Because there's Kalen Carson joining the team. He played 4 seasons of special teams for Wake Forest. But you've also got Eric Scott Jr. in his second year, who was a trades pick back in 2023. So he might ask for a roster spot. And if he provides some special teams value, what does that mean for CJ? But you also got the Marvin Overshown, who I don't know if he's going to be starting early on, but he was supposed to be a special teams ace for John Fassel, and a big reason why they picked him in the third round last year. You're adding Maris Liafo to the team, and he's also expected to be a special teams contributor. And you've got Hunter Lipke and the tight ends. So suddenly I'm starting to wonder, like, does CJ Goodwin this time maybe does have some realistic competition? Now we'll see. Again, I do have him on my 53 just because he's earned that right. But it's not the only cornerback that I wanted to talk about today, because the other cornerback put on blast, in my opinion, is Nashawn Wright. Going back to Eric Scott Jr., to Kalen Carson, maybe even like Josh Butler and the UDFA Josh DeVary. Like, suddenly Wright is going to be clinging on to that final roster spot at cornerback, and he might lose out on the opportunity to be on the 53 for the Cowboys if Carson is who they want him to be, and especially if Eric Scott Jr. makes that second-year jump, which I'm betting on in my 53 projection. I've got Eric Scott Jr. making it over Nashawn Wright. And now you've got 5 cornerbacks. You're likely going to go long at safety because you're so talented in that position. So little margin for error there at cornerback. And final name on the list, just to round out our 7 players. We've talked about Hendershot. We've talked about Brock Hoffman, Chuma Edoga. We've talked about Willam Foko, Nashawn Wright, CJ Goodwin. 7th player on the list to me is Damon Clark. Now, this is an obvious one. I don't think Clark's roster spot is in jeopardy, but you went from being the starter alongside a converted safety who is going back to the safety room, and you might still lose out on the opportunity to start because Eric Kendricks is going to be above you on the depth chart. He knows the Mike Zimmer defense. He's a tested veteran with so much production over the last 8 years, plus 100 tackles, like a legitimate NFL starting linebacker and a quality one at that. And behind Eric Kendricks, even though Stephen Jones went out there and he said, we're going to use a 3 linebacker system, you're still going to be in nickel the majority of the time. So you're talking about 1 additional starting linebacker. And if Overshown in his second year continues to show what he was showing in training camp and in the preseason of last year, I would project Overshown as my starting linebacker over Damon Clark. Now, add to that you might have a surprise there in Maurice Liafau, and suddenly Clark's just overall role with the Cowboys might start getting a little bit shaky, especially going into the future, right? Like 2025. Is Damon Clark still around for the Cowboys? That's going to be worth asking when the moment comes. That being said, a couple of UDFAs added onto the linebacker room. There's Damian Wilson, Liafau, and Overshown. They're going to have special teams value, which might just end up being kind of like the final edge on Damon Clark. And I mean, I guess the Cowboys will have 4 linebackers active for each game day, but if not, could one of them be inactive, right? Like, it's going to be an interesting dynamic on the linebacker room just because there's Kendricks, the tested veteran, and then there's 3 young guys, because Clark is still a young guy that have so much to prove yet. And that part of it is going to be very, very fun. Let me know if I missed anyone in the show tonight, in case you want to bring up somebody else that was put on blast and maybe we didn't get to. But in the meantime, though, I'll see you tomorrow on Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central, on Thursday night when we have the live show. Every Sunday, Thursdays, we do live shows. And then in between, we're catching up with each other with these shorter, quick-hitting videos. Let me know if you like them. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.